There are mornings in this city that arrive like a fist, not with violence, not with drama, but with the particular blunt insistence of something that does not care whether you are ready. The kind of morning that was already loud when you opened your eyes, when the road outside had already made its decision about the day and gone ahead without you. When the light that pressed through the curtain was that gray-orange color of a city that never fully goes dark. A city that keeps its fires burning through the night, not out of joy, but out of restlessness, out of the old restless habit of always wanting more. The number 37 bus left the Kanshi depot at 5 minutes past 6 on a Tuesday morning in the dry month of February, when the harmattan had settled its pale dust over everything and the air tasted faintly of somewhere far north, of red earth and dry grass and old winds that had blown themselves out long before they arrived. The bus was full, the way these buses were always full, packed with the quiet geometry of people who had learned to arrange themselves in small spaces without complaint. The woman with the market basket balanced between her feet, the young man gripping the overhead bar with one hand and his phone with the other, the schoolgirl by the window who had drifted back to sleep against the glass, her mouth slightly open, her uniform collar pressed neatly against her cheek, as if ironed by someone who loved her very much. The man in the third seat from the back was not one of the regulars. And anybody who rode the number 37 each morning could have told you that. If this story is already warming your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to Village Heart. And drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love knowing our little village reaches so far. He was too still for it. Regular bus people carry a practiced looseness in their bodies, a way of absorbing the lurching and the sudden braking and the pulling forward that comes from years of learning to trust the road even when the road does not entirely deserve it. This man sat like someone accustomed to things moving smoothly. His hands rested in his lap, unhurried, almost patient. His eyes went to the window the way the eyes of certain people go to windows, not looking for anything in particular, but looking away from everything else. He was wearing a plain dark shirt, simple trousers, nothing that announced him. And yet, there was a watch on his left wrist that caught the morning light once, briefly, as the bus swung around the corner near the old market, and a woman standing in the aisle with a basin of tomatoes happened to glance down at exactly that moment, and then up at his face, and then away again. The way you look away from something that does not quite fit the place it is sitting, and you do not know how to arrange it in your mind. His name was Kwame Asante. He was 57 years old. He was, though nobody on that bus would have guessed it, one of the wealthiest men in the country. The kind of wealthy that had a floor in two different buildings named after it. The kind of wealthy that did not arrive at places. Places adjusted themselves around his arrival. He had a driver named Kofi who had been with him for 12 years and who knew without being told that on Tuesday mornings, the ring road ran slow after 7 and that the chairman, this is what Kofi called him, always the chairman, in the careful, respectful way of a man who has given his loyalty fully and considers it well placed. The chairman did not like to be late. Kofi had called at 20 minutes to 6 that morning, his voice carrying the particular thinness of a man who had been awake for hours, feeling worse and trying very hard not to show it. "My legs, sir, since last night. I tried to manage." "Go to the clinic," Kwame had told him. "Go now. Don't try to manage anything." The security team had sent 3 messages in 4 minutes. A substitute driver, a company car. An emergency car service kept on in retainer for exactly these situations. Kwame had read all 3. He had looked out the window of his bedroom, the large bedroom on the 3rd floor with the ceiling fan that turned in slow, unbothered circles, and the view of a street that was already wide awake at 5 in the morning. And he had seen, 200 meters down the road, the yellow post of the number 37 bus stop. He had put on his plain dark shirt and walked to it, His head of security, Emmanuel, had called as he was walking out the gate. "Sir, I cannot in good conscience allow—" "I rode that bus every morning for 4 years when I was starting out," Kwame said. "I remember how it works." He did not tell Emmanuel the other reason, with the one that had been sitting quietly at the back of his mind since before the alarm went off, since the particular kind of 3 in the morning wakefulness that visits certain men at certain points in their lives. Not from fear, but from something more difficult and more honest than fear. From a reckoning that had been patient enough to wait until he was still. In 48 hours, he would be signing the papers for the largest land acquisition of his career. 300 hectares along the old northern corridor. The final piece of a portfolio 30 years in the making, and he had woken at 3 that morning and lain in his large silent dark and thought about that road north. About the village at the end of it. About the last time he had driven that road in the other direction. Leaving, not arriving. Young, and burning with something he had called ambition then, and which he was no longer entirely sure deserved that clean a name. He had left that village with one bag and a plan, and the particular coldness of a man who has told himself that leaving is simply another word for moving forward. He had not been back. 300 hectares of land along that very road would now carry his name. He thought about all of this as the number 37 moved through the city. He watched the bread sellers pushing their carts. He watched the school children walking in pairs, their uniforms the pale blue of a particular kind of morning hope. He watched a woman on the side of the road selling tomatoes from a wide enamel tray, completely still inside all the noise around her. The way women who have stood in markets all their lives learn to become still, not absent, but present in a way that is deeper than movement. He watched the city and he thought about the road north. The bus had been running for 18 minutes when it stopped at the Abasi-Okai junction, where the market spread out on both sides of the road, and the air thickened with the smell of charcoal and frying oil, and the particular close sweetness of fruit warming too quickly in the early sun. 3 or 4 people boarded with the practiced urgency of those who know how fast a bus driver changes his mind. They found their spaces, and the bus began to pull away. And then a hand gripped the door rail, and the driver stopped. She came up the steps slowly, one hand on the rail, the other holding a bundle of cloth pressed against her chest. Not a bag exactly, but a gathering of things. A collection held together with the care of someone for whom every owned object is a needed object. Her feet were wrapped in strips of old cloth, tied with cord, the kind of improvised footwear a person fashions when the alternative is the bare ground, and she moved with the careful deliberateness of someone for whom every step requires a small, private negotiation with the body. She was old, perhaps 65, perhaps older. The street is unkind to precise ages. Her face carried the record of long exposure, not cruelty, but weather. Sun and wind and too many seasons of insufficient shelter. The kind of aging that comes not from years alone, but from years carrying weight that was never equally shared. Her hair was mostly white, gathered in a short, soft cloud at the crown of her head. Her dress had once been a deep blue with a small yellow pattern at the hem. The kind of fabric a woman chooses carefully in a better time, in a market on a good day, with money saved for the purpose. She had worn it a long time past that day. The blue had gone to a pale suggestion of itself. The yellow pattern at the hem had faded to the color of old paper. But she wore it as if it still meant what it had meant the day she chose it. She stood at the front of the bus and looked for a seat. What happened next lasted perhaps 20 seconds. And in those 20 seconds, with no words spoken, with no raised voice, with nothing that anyone on that bus could have pointed to afterward and called unkind, the message was delivered with perfect clarity. The young man nearest the door, pressed shirt, leather briefcase on his knees, looked up at her and looked back at his phone. He did not make a face. He simply looked and looked away, which is a form of closing a door so practiced that most people who do it have long since stopped noticing the sound it makes. The woman with the baby shifted her child from one knee to the other and angled her shoulder toward the window. The man in the middle section moved his bag from the seat beside him to between his feet, and then, in the same motion, turned his body toward the person on his other side, filling the space he had just freed with the language of his posture. A young woman 2 rows back made brief eye contact with the old woman, then dropped her gaze to her lap and became very attentive to something in the pattern of her skirt that had not previously required her attention. So all of this in 20 seconds. The old woman said nothing. She held her bundle and she looked at the seats, and she wore the expression of someone who has received this message before, many times before, who has learned that certain kinds of doors do not open from the outside, and that standing and waiting and saying nothing is both the only option available and, in its own quiet way, a form of dignity that costs more than anyone watching will ever fully understand. From the third seat from the back, Kwame watched. He had spent 30 years building things, buildings and companies and portfolios, and a name that moved through certain rooms the way weather moves through a landscape, felt before it is seen. He had spent 30 years reading the air in rooms, and learning the particular skill of someone who started with nothing and could not afford to misread what was happening around him. He saw what was happening on that bus. He also thought briefly and clearly of his mother, of her hands, small, dry, certain hands, and the particular flat look she gave him on the 2 or 3 occasions in his childhood when she had seen him behave in a way that fell short of what she expected. She did not shout. She did not lecture. She simply looked at him with that look, and the look said, "You know better than this. I raised you to know better than this." She had been dead for 9 years. He still felt that look. He moved his bag from the seat beside him. It was not a grand gesture, not the kind of thing that draws attention. Simply a man shifting a bag from one place to another and patting the freed seat once, lightly with the flat of his hand. The ordinary small signal of a space made available, a welcome offered without fanfare. The old woman saw. She made her way down the aisle, one hand steadying herself against the backs of seats as she passed. She lowered herself into the seat with the careful, deliberate patience of someone whose joints have logged their complaints and been noted but not yet fully accommodated. She arranged her bundle on her lap. She settled, and she let out a breath. Quiet, brief, barely a sound, but carrying in it the full weight of the morning, and perhaps of many mornings before this one. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The bus moved. Outside, the city moved with it. And the market fell behind and the road opened up, and the morning light fell at a lower angle through the dusty windows, turning everything the color of old brass. Then Kwame said, in the language his mother had spoken to him every morning of his boyhood, the words of the home place, the language of a village that sat at the end of a road he had not driven north on in 30 years. Maki, Mama, Woho Sen. Good morning, Mother. How are you? The old woman turned to look at him. Something moved in her face, a small, involuntary thing, the way a face moves when it is caught off guard by something decent, something it had not arranged itself to receive and does not quite know in the first moment where to put. Fine, my son, she said in the same language. I am managing. He opened the small paper bag his assistant had packed that morning. Force of habit, the assistant always said. The chairman does not eat before 8, but I always pack something, just in case. And he took out a small parcel of kinky wrapped in foil in a container of stew, still holding the last of its warmth. He held it toward her. She looked at the food. She looked at his face. Her eyes, dark and still, and carrying in them the patience of someone who has learned to look at things for a long time before deciding what they mean, moved over his features slowly. I haven't eaten this morning either, he said, which was not quite true, but which was also not quite a lie. You'll be helping me. It was the kind of thing his mother would have said, the phrasing that turns giving into sharing, when that removes from the receiving person the burden of gratitude by making the gesture mutual. He had not planned it. It had simply come, the way old lessons come, quietly from somewhere below the conscious mind, from the place where a good upbringing lives long after the person who provided it is gone. She took the food from him. She ate carefully, not quickly, not with the hunched urgency of someone afraid the food will be taken back. She ate the way a person eats when they were once taught to eat with respect, when food was something to be honored, when the table, even a table with very little on it, was still a place of occasion. The old manner was still there, underneath everything, worn but intact. The bus went on. Kwame did not watch her eat. He looked at the road. He thought peripherally, and the way a man thinks when the main part of his mind is occupied with something it has not yet named, about the village, about the road north, about the face of a girl, a young woman, she had been 22, standing at the edge of a compound in the last light of an afternoon, watching him put his bag in the back of his friend's truck. He had not looked back. He had told himself for 30 years that he had not looked back because looking back would have made it harder. He was beginning to understand that this was not precisely accurate. He was beginning to understand that he had not looked back because he did not want to see what he was leaving. At some point, somewhere between La Paz and the Akimoto turnoff, the city shifting around them in its ordinary morning business, he became aware that the old woman was looking at him. Not the polite, brief look of a stranger receiving an unexpected kindness, checking to confirm the giver is real and the gift is genuine. Something else, something longer and more considered. The look of someone who has found a thread of something in an unfamiliar place and is pulling it very carefully, not yet sure what it is attached to, but unwilling to let go. She was looking at the left side of his face, at his jaw, at the way it set when he was in thought, and he was in thought, had been in thought the whole ride. The northern road and the papers and the long, sleepless dark of 3 in the morning. She was looking at the particular angle of his shoulders and the way his hands rested in his lap. Fingers slightly curved, the same way his father had rested his hands when he sat in the old wooden chair under the neem tree in the compound. He did not know she was looking for this. He did not know she knew this. She looked at the place just below his left ear, at a small faded scar, the kind left by a childhood fall, a piece of wire from a fence, the ordinary small damage of a rural boyhood that is written on the body forever, however far from that boyhood a man travels. The bus slowed for the light at the Akimoto junction. The city pressed in on both sides. A woman moved between the stopped cars with water sachets stacked in a basin on her head, navigating the gap between a trotro and a private car with the unhurried precision of someone who has done this 10,000 times and expects to do it 10,000 more. And in that stillness, in the brief, particular pause of a city holding its breath at a red light, the old woman beside him leaned very slightly in his direction, so slightly that a person 1 row away would not have noticed, and in a voice that was barely more than breath given the shape of words, in a voice that was low and careful and full, the way a voice goes when it is carrying something it has carried alone for a very long time, and is only now, here, in this unremarkable moment, on this unremarkable bus. Setting down, she said a name. Esinam, 1 word, just that. Kwame Asante did not move. The light changed. The bus moved forward. The city around him resumed its noise and its purpose, and its great indifferent forward motion. He did not move. The name had reached somewhere in him that no boardroom, no acquisition, no building with his name on the side of it had ever come close to reaching. The place below thought, below decision, below the 30 years of deliberate forward movement. The place that had never, in all that time, stopped knowing the name, had never, no matter how many floors of concrete and glass and careful achievement were piled on top of it, fully let the name go. Esinam, he turned, slowly. The way a man turns when he is not entirely sure what he will find when he completes the turn, but understands that turning away is no longer a choice that belongs to him. The old woman was looking at him already, her eyes dark and patient and holding in them the particular quality of someone who has rehearsed this moment many times in the long, private hours of many long, private nights. Were steady. They looked at each other. The harmattan dust hung in the slanted bus light between them, fine and pale, like something almost visible, like the air had taken on weight, like the 30 years that lay between the name she had spoken and the morning they were sitting in had compressed themselves into this single held breath, this single stillness on the number 37 bus on a Tuesday in February, in a city that did not know and did not care what was happening 3 seats from the back. She said nothing more. Neither did he. But between them, in the space between the spoken name and the silence that followed it, in the held breath of a moment that had been 30 years in the finding, everything had already begun. His mother had a saying. She said it the way she said most important things, not as a lesson, not as a warning, not standing over him with her hands on her hips the way some mothers deliver the truths they most want their children to carry. She said it while doing something else, while stirring the pot or sorting grain, or standing at the doorway of the house watching the sun go down over the compound wall with that particular expression she wore in the evenings, the one that suggested she was seeing more than the setting sun. She would say it almost to herself, almost to the air, as if the thought had simply found its way out of her without asking permission. What a man buries in the ground does not become soil, she would say. It becomes seed. He had been perhaps 12 years old the first time he heard her say it. He had not understood it then. He had been 12. And the world was still something that happened to him rather than something he was happening inside of. He had filed it away with the other things she said that he did not yet understand. The ones that lived in a back room of his mind through his boyhood, in his school years, and his early days in the city, waiting with great patience for the moment when life would offer them their context. He understood it now. Sitting on the number 37 bus on a Tuesday morning in February, with the harmattan light falling pale and golden through the dusty windows, and the city moving around him with its great indifferent noise. Sitting next to an old woman in a faded blue dress who had just spoken a single name into the quiet between them and then said nothing more. Kwame Asante understood exactly what his mother had meant. He looked at the old woman. As she was looking out the window now, or appearing to look out the window, the way a person looks at something when they are not actually seeing it, when their eyes have been given the job of resting somewhere safe while everything else in them does its real work. Her hands were folded over her bundle in her lap. The knuckles were large, the way knuckles become large on hands that have worked long and hard in all weathers, on hands that have kneaded dough and carried water and pulled roots from the ground and braided children's hair and pressed cool cloth to fevers in the night. Hands that have done the full and unceasing work of a life lived in full. He said carefully, in the language of the home place, the language that she had used, and the language that had been his first language before the school English, and the business English, and the international meeting English had layered themselves over it, one by one, like cloth over cloth, until sometimes the original fabric was almost invisible. Mama, that name. How do you know that name? She did not turn immediately. She took her time. The way she had taken her time boarding the bus, the way she had taken her time lowering herself into the seat. There was something in her rhythm that reminded him against his will of water, of the way water does not hurry, does not force, simply finds the level it needs to find in its own time through whatever opening is available to it. When she turned, her face was composed, but her eyes, her dark, patient, knowing eyes, were doing the thing they had been doing since before the name, with that slow, considered reading of his face, as if she were cross-referencing what she saw against something she had carried in her mind for a very long time. "You are Kwame," she said. It was not a question. He held himself still. "Yes, Kwame Asante, the builder's son, from Aduanu." The bus rocked gently around a bend. Someone near the front said something that made the person beside them laugh briefly, a single bright sound, and then it was quiet again. The name of the village, small, particular, specific as a fingerprint. The name of the compound and the dusty road and the neem tree and his mother's voice, sat in the warm air of the bus and asked nothing of him except that he receive it. "Yes," he said again. His voice was level, the voice of a man who has trained himself over decades to sound level in difficult rooms. Oh, but something underneath it was not level. Something underneath it had, at the sound of that village name, lurched with the specific, poorly managed movement of a thing that has been held in place for a long time by sheer determination and has just been touched in exactly the wrong or exactly the right place. "I am Abena," the old woman said. "Esinam's mother." Later, much later, in the weeks and months that followed, when he tried to describe what happened inside him at those 4 words, he could not do it cleanly. There was no single thing he could point to and say, "This is what I felt." There were too many things. They arrived all at once, the way they will when a dam is breached, not in sequence, not in order of importance, but all together in a great, simultaneous rush that makes it impossible in the moment to separate grief from guilt, from longing from shame, from relief, and from a very old love that had never, no matter how much concrete and glass and deliberate forward motion he had piled on top of it, fully agreed to die. He looked at her face. He looked at it the way you look at something that has blindsided you. Not all at once, but piece by piece, detail by detail, as if your mind is verifying what your eyes are reporting and needs to do it slowly to be sure. He could see it now. He could not understand why he had not seen it before. The shape of the eyes, the particular set of the jaw, and the angle of something in the face that belonged to a specific compound in a specific village at the end of a specific road he had not driven north on in 30 years, but that he had carried inside him in that stubbornly unmortared inner room the whole time. Esinam. He had loved her when he was 24 years old. He had loved her the way a young man loves when he does not yet know how to do it carefully. With everything available to him, with no portion held back, with the full force of a heart that had not yet learned to protect itself by rationing what it gave. She had been 22. She had been laughing when he first truly saw her, not just looked at, but saw, standing in the compound of her father's house on a Harmattan evening, very much like this one, her head tilted back, her hands around a cup of palm wine, laughing at something her cousin had said. The laugh was everything, open and unguarded and completely hers. He had known in that moment, with the certainty that comes sometimes without warning and cannot be argued with, that she was the kind of person he wanted to be near for the rest of his life. He had spent 2 years being near her, 2 years of sitting together at the edge of the compound in the cool of the evening. 2 years of walking the red dirt road to the market on Saturday mornings, her basket over one arm, her fingers finding his without looking. 2 years of her voice in the mornings, low and amused and full of a humor that was always gentle, never sharp, saying his name the way no one else said it, as if it were a word that meant something specific, something good. He had planned to build something. That was what he had told himself. He had seen it clearly. The city, the opportunity, the construction business that his father's brother had started and half abandoned. the gap in the market that no one with the right determination had yet thought to fill. He had seen himself filling it. He had seen buildings rising. He had seen his name on things. And Esinam, he had told himself, would wait, or come with him, or be folded somehow into the life he was building. He had not thought about it with any precision, because precision would have required him to confront the fact that he was asking a person to arrange herself around a plan she had not made, for a future she had not been invited to help design. He had been 24. Precision was not yet his strength. The morning he left, she had stood at the edge of the compound. Sorry, she had not cried. That was the thing about Esinam. She did not use tears as argument or as accusation. She stood there in the pale early light in her cloth wrapper, her arms folded loosely across her chest, her face carrying the composed expression of someone who has already understood what is happening and has made their own decision about how they will hold it. She watched him put his bag in the truck. She watched him embrace his mother. She watched his uncle start the engine. And then she said quietly, from where she stood, just loud enough for him to hear across the compound, not loud enough for anyone else. Come back, Kwame, when you've done what you need to do. Come back. He had raised his hand to her through the window as the truck pulled out of the compound. He had told himself he would come back. He had believed it when he said it, or at least he had believed it enough to avoid examining it too closely. The belief was a door he could close behind him, a door that, once closed, he found he did not need to open again. Because each month the city demanded more of him, and each year the plan grew more complex and more consuming. And each time he thought of the road north, and he did think of it, in the first years with some frequency, and then less, and then only in the unguarded 3 in the morning hours, he found that the thought was easier to set aside than to act upon. And eventually, he could not have told you in what year, in what season, in what particular moment of comfortable inertia, he had simply stopped. And the way a man stops doing something he always meant to do and keeps meaning to do until the meaning is indistinguishable from the not doing. He had heard once from a distant cousin passing through the city that Esinam had married, a teacher from the next town. He had received this information with a feeling he had immediately labeled relief and filed away and not looked at again for 30 years. He understood now, sitting on this bus next to this woman with her large-knuckled hands and her dark, patient eyes, that what he had labeled relief was something more complicated, something that had used the clothes of relief because they were available and because the alternative required a level of honesty that he had not, at that particular moment, been willing to bring to himself. I heard she married, he said. The words came out carefully, like a man feeling for solid ground in the dark. She did, Abena said. A good man. He loved her well. He loved her well. The past tense arrived in the sentence quietly, the way past tenses arrive in stories like these. Not announced, not dramatized, just placed there in the grammar of it, doing its quiet, devastating work. Kwame heard it. Abena, he said slowly, is Esinam. She is gone, the old woman said. Simply, the way people say the true hard things when they have said them many times before, and the rawness has worn down to something more like stone, still heavy, still permanent, but no longer with edges that cut. 2 years ago, her heart, it was quick. The bus moved. The city moved. The Harmattan light lay over everything in its pale, even indifferent gold. Kwame looked at his hands in his lap, the same hands that had once lifted a bag into the back of a truck while a young woman stood in a compound and asked him to come back. I am sorry, he said. The 2 words were not enough. They both knew it, but they were the only ones available, and he said them with the full weight of what they were carrying. Not the social sorry, not the reflex sorry, but the sorry of a man confronting something in himself that he can no longer see any reason to defend. Abena looked at him for a long moment. "She did not spend her life waiting for you," she said. Her voice was not unkind. It was simply accurate. The way the voice of a woman who has watched a long story unfold from the beginning goes when she is deciding to tell it straight. She was happy. She had a full life. She had her husband. She had her children. She paused. She had her daughter. Something in the way she said it, a small shift in the weight of the sentence. The way a sentence shifts when the word at the end of it is the real sentence. When everything before it is simply the path that leads to the word that matters. Her daughter. Kwame looked at Abena. Abena looked back at him. And in the space between those two looks, in the compressed and breathless air of that small bus on that ordinary Tuesday morning, the thing that had been approaching since before the name, the thing that had been moving toward this moment perhaps since a young man put his bag in a truck and drove south and told himself he would come back, arrived. If this story has found its way into your heart, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new tale from Village Heart. Your support is what keeps the fire burning, and more stories like this one coming your way. "How old?" he asked. His voice had gone quiet, quieter than usual, the quietness of a man standing at the edge of something and looking down. "She will be 29 in March," Abena said. 29. He did not do the arithmetic immediately. The mind, when it is protecting itself, can be slow about arithmetic it knows will hurt. But the number was there, and the year of his leaving was there. And the months between those two things were there, and then the arithmetic was simply done, with no further permission sought from him. "Abena," he said, very carefully, "did Esinam, when I left, was she?" "Yes," Abena said. One word, final and quiet and 30 years in the saying. He pressed his hand flat against the seat in front of him. "She told me 2 weeks before you left," Abena continued, in the measured voice of a woman delivering testimony she has carried alone and finally put down. "She came to me after. She said you had told her it was not the time, that you had a plan, that the plan could not hold a child." The bus had stopped again. A smaller stop, a stretch of road where an old woman stood with a tray of water sachets and called out in a high businesslike voice, and a few hands reached from windows to buy, and coins were exchanged. And the ordinary commerce of an ordinary morning went on without interruption. While in the back seats a man sat with his hand pressed flat against the seat in front of him and understood that the plan he had carried for 30 years, the clean, purposeful, a forward-moving plan, was built on a foundation he had never once allowed himself to examine. "She did not tell me where you went," Abena said. "Not for a long time. She said there was no point in chasing a man who had chosen to leave. She said she had no interest in building a life in the direction of someone else's fear." A pause. Those were her words. You can hear her in them. He could. That was the unbearable part. He could hear her in them, exactly. "She raised her daughter," Abena said. "They lived in the village until the child was 7. Then they moved to the city. Her husband, Kofi Mensah, he was transferred to his school in Accra. They built a life, a good life. I want you to understand that. She was not a woman who wasted her years in bitterness. She was not made that way." "I know," Kwame said softly. "But the child," Abena said. And here her voice did something it had not done before, a small, almost imperceptible thing, a tightening, followed by a deliberate easing, the way a person breathes on purpose when they need to say something without breaking. The child grew up asking, "Kwame." Children ask. It is what they do. They ask because they are trying to understand the shape of themselves. And a question without an answer does not go away. It grows with the child. It grows into the adult. She looked down at her hands. Esinam told her the truth when she was old enough. She told her that her father was a young man from the village who had gone to the city before she was born. She told her his name. She told her that he had not known about her. Abena paused. This last part was not entirely accurate, but it was kind. Esinam was a kind woman. Kwame closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Four? Does she? He started. The daughter? Does she? Her name is Akosua, Abena said. And no, she does not know you are in this city. She does not know your name in the way you think. She knows only what her mother told her, that her father was called Kwame and that he had gone south to build something. A pause, the weight of a stone. She has spent 29 years not knowing whether that something was worth the leaving. The bus was slowing for the Ring Road junction. Outside, the city had thickened, the morning traffic building into its familiar midday complexity, the road narrowing with the density of vehicles and vendors, and the general insistent press of 100,000 individual mornings happening simultaneously. Kwame looked at Abena. He looked at her fully now, without the guard, and without the practiced composure that had served him in every difficult room for 30 years. He looked at her the way a man looks when he has run out of the energy required to look like something other than what he is. She was a small woman. She was old and tired, and her dress was faded, and her feet were wrapped in cloth and cord. She had boarded a bus that didn't want her, and sat in the seat she was given and eaten kenki she had been offered, and then said a single name that had reached through 30 years of careful forward motion and found without difficulty the one place in him that had never agreed to move on. Why are you in the city, he asked. Why are you on this bus? She was quiet for a moment. Then, I came to find my granddaughter. She moved, a new apartment in this part of the city. I had her address on a piece of paper. She glanced briefly down at the bundle in her lap with an expression that made Kwame look at it differently. Not a bundle, he now understood, but a gathering of things a woman assembles when she does not know how long she will be away from home. I lost the paper 3 days ago at the lorry park. It fell from my wrapper. She said this without drama, the way a person describes misfortune they have accepted. I have been looking since then. I thought someone on this route might know the street, the area she described to me. You have been on the street for 3 days. I know some people, she said. I have not been alone. But she had been sitting at the front of this bus in old cloth shoes and a dress the color of faded sky with a bundle that held everything, and no one had moved their bag. What street, he said. She told him. He knew it. He knew the whole city. It was, in a sense, his city. Not by birth, but by 30 years of building in it, around it, alongside it. He had poured foundations in that neighborhood. He had watched the streets she named go from a dirt track to tarmac under contracts he had signed. I know that street, he said. She looked at him. I can take you there, he said. A pause. Not a hesitant pause. A considering one. The pause of a woman who has learned to be careful about what she accepts from whom and why and at what cost. The pause of a woman who has given away her trust exactly once to a man in this city and watched it disappear down a southbound road. Why? She asked, simply and directly. And because she had come this far in directness, not because she had spoken Esinam's name into his ear on a public bus and then sat with the silence of what followed with more composure than he had managed, and because it was the only thing he could offer that meant anything at all, he answered her just as directly. Because I owe Esinam a debt I can never repay, he said, and because this is the first time in 30 years that something has put the chance to begin trying directly in front of me on a Tuesday morning. And I do not think, he stopped. He looked at his hands. I do not think I should let it pass again. Abena looked at him for a long time. The bus had stopped at the junction. The driver was calling out the terminus. People were rising, collecting bags and baskets and sleeping children. The ordinary reorganization of the end of a journey. Around them, the bus was emptying. Then Abena said, She will not be happy to see you. I know. She has her own life, a good job, a child of her own now. Esinam's grandchild, my great-grandchild. She said these last words with a warmth that came from somewhere older and deeper than anything else in her voice. She is a strong woman, like her mother. I would expect nothing less. Another pause. You will not come in and say, my name is Kwame Asante, and I have buildings in this city, Abena said. You will not come as the chairman. You will come as the person responsible for a debt. You will come quietly and you will let her decide everything, whatever she decides. Yes, he said, without hesitation, whatever she decides. Abena looked at him once more, that long, slow, cross-referencing look, reading his face against the record of things she had stored in her mind across the years, and checking with the patience of a woman who has had to learn to read people the hard way, through loss and through the long aftermath of loss. Whether what she was hearing in his voice was what she thought it was, or whether it was something else wearing the same clothes, she seemed to find what she was looking for, or perhaps she found something close enough to it that the distinction no longer mattered. All right, she said. She said it the way a door sounds when it opens, not with fanfare, just the small, certain sound of a thing that had been closed for a long time moving, at last, in the other direction. She stood, slowly, with the careful negotiation of her joints. Kwame stood beside her. He offered his arm without announcement, the way you offer an arm to someone who needs steadying, not calling attention to the need, simply making the thing available. She took it without fuss. They stepped off the bus together. The city received them with its usual magnificent indifference. The vendors, the noise, the heat beginning to build as the morning climbed toward midday. The harmattan dust hanging in the air over everything like a held breath. Kwame stood on the pavement and looked at his phone. He called Emmanuel, his head of security, whose number he now dialed for the first time that morning. Sir, Emmanuel answered immediately, with the barely controlled relief of a man who had been managing very controlled panic for the past 2 hours. I need a car, Kwame said. No driver. I'll drive myself. And Emmanuel. Just the car. Nothing else. A pause. Sir, nothing else, he said again, quietly, finally. The car came in 11 minutes. It was the smaller one. In the unmarked silver saloon that he used sometimes when he did not want to arrive somewhere as the chairman. He held the door for Abena. She settled into the passenger seat with an expression that was entirely unreadable, which was itself a kind of eloquence. The expression of a woman who has learned to wait for the thing to happen before she decides what she feels about it. He drove. He drove through streets he knew the way a builder knows the city he has built. From the inside out, from the foundations up, from the plans that existed before the structures, and the structures that outlived the plans. He drove past a corner where he had signed his first contract at 27 years old. Standing in the road beside a table someone had carried out from a nearby office because there was no conference room available. But he drove past a building whose first floor bore a plaque he had never once stopped to read since the day they put it up, because moving forward had always been more urgent than looking at what was already done. He drove and did not speak. Abena did not speak either. But once, on the long, straight stretch of the new road that ran through the old neighborhood, where the tarmac he had helped lay was already doing its quiet, dignified job of connecting one place to another. She looked out the window at the city going past and said softly, as if to the glass, "She used to say she hoped you built good things." He looked at the road, not for herself. She said she was past that. A pause. She said she hoped that whatever you went to build, you build it with care. She said a man who builds without care is just a man making noise. He drove. She said she taught Akosua that. She said, whatever you make it carefully. Make it as if someone's life will rest on it. Because it will. The city moved past the windows. The harmattan light lay over everything in its pale, even gold. And in that moving light, in the space between the woman's words and the silence that held them after she finished speaking, Kwame Asante, the chairman, the builder, the man with floors named after him in two buildings, the man who had woken at 3 that morning on the wrong side of an important silence, understood something that no contract had ever taught him, that the largest thing he had ever built was not a building, that the most important foundation he had ever laid was not concrete, that somewhere in the city, in a street he had tarmacked and an apartment he was about to find, there was a 29-year-old woman, the daughter of the laugh he had left behind at the edge of a compound on a Harmattan morning 30 years ago, who had been built out of her mother's courage and her grandmother's patience and the particular, stubborn, unextinguishable human impulse to make something good out of what someone else's fear had broken, and he had not laid a single stone of her. He pulled the car onto the street that Abena had named. He drove slowly, the way you drive when you are not sure what you are arriving at, when you know the address but not the welcome, when you have been moving in one direction for 30 years and you are now, for the first time, facing the direction you left. He found the building. He found the parking space. And he turned off the engine. The street was ordinary, modest, clean. A woman swept the entrance of the building across the road in long, unhurried strokes. A child ran past on some self-important errand. A radio played from somewhere above them, distant, cheerful, leaking through a half-open window into the morning air. Abena did not move to get out immediately. She sat and looked at the building. Then she said, without turning to him, "She will want to know why. That will be the first thing she asks. Not who you are, not what you have. Why? Why now? Why here? Why after 29 years?" She paused. "What will you tell her?" Kwame looked at the building, at the ordinary front door, at the list of names beside the buzzers, small printed cards and small plastic holders, each one a person, each person a whole world of their own behind the door. "I will tell her the truth," he said. "She has heard that before from men in the city," Abena said. "I know." He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. "But it is all I have to offer her, and I am finished offering her anything less." A long moment. Then Abena reached into the bundle on her lap, and from the deepest fold of it, from the place where a woman keeps the things that must not be lost no matter what else is lost, she took out something small, a photograph, worn at the edges, folded once, long ago, along a crease that had become part of the image. She unfolded it carefully and held it out. He took it, and his hands, which had signed contracts for 30 years without trembling, trembled now. It was a photograph of a young woman, 20, perhaps 21, standing in a compound. He knew that compound. He could feel the dust of it on the soles of his feet even now, after all the distance. The light was a Harmattan light, pale and gold, exactly like this morning's light. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her hands open at her sides, her eyes pressed nearly closed with the force of it. The laugh was everything, open and unguarded and completely hers. Esinam, and behind her, at the edge of the compound, barely in the frame, half turned as if about to leave, a young man, bag in hand, truck visible at the periphery, himself, a copy of the same photograph. She had kept it. All those years, the marriage, the children, the city, the life fully lived in the direction away from him. She had kept the photograph that showed them both. He held it and could not speak. "She left it for Akosua," Abena said softly, when she knew she was sick. "So she left it with a note. She said, 'One day you may want to know his face. Here it is. What you do with the knowing is yours to decide, not mine.'" The radio from the half-open window played on, cheerful and distant and completely unaware of what it was floating over. Kwame looked at the photograph of himself at 24 years old, standing at the edge of a compound with a bag in his hand. He looked at the compound, the gate at the far left of the photograph standing open. He thought about what Esinam had said to him across that compound on the morning he left. "Come back, Kwame, when you've done what you need to do. Come back." He folded the photograph carefully along its worn crease and held it out to Abena. She shook her head. "It was left for Akosua," she said. "You will give it to her yourself." He held the photograph, for he looked at the door of the building. "Are you ready?" Abena said. Was he ready? He thought about 30 years of buildings, about foundations poured in the dark of early mornings, when the city was still deciding what shape the day would take, about the number 37 bus and the Harmattan light and a seat that he had moved a bag from without thinking, about a name spoken into his ear, like something that had been in that ear since before he was old enough to understand it, waiting only for the silence in which to make itself heard. About his mother stirring a pot in a kitchen that smelled of wood smoke and palm oil, saying without looking up, "What a man buries in the ground does not become soil. It becomes seed." He opened the car door. "Yes," he said, "I am ready." He was not, entirely, but he was finished waiting to be. They walked toward the door together. The old woman in her faded blue dress, her cloth-wrapped feet finding the pavement with their careful, unhurried tread, and the man who had built a city and never come back, carrying a folded photograph in 30 years of something that was not quite grief and not quite guilt, but was larger than either, and was now, finally, walking in the only direction it could ever have been healed. Toward. Akosua opened the door on the second knock. She was tall. She had her mother's eyes. That same dark, unhurried stillness that read a room before committing to it. She looked at Abena first, and her face opened with relief and a swift, scolding love. "Nana, 3 days. 3 days I have been calling." Then she saw Kwame. She did not know his face from memory. And she knew it from a folded photograph her mother had left in an envelope beside a handwritten note, to be opened when she felt ready. She had opened it 6 months after the funeral, sitting alone in the same apartment, on the floor with her back against the bed. She knew the face. Her expression did not collapse. It did not harden. It simply went very still. The way her mother's face had gone still when something required her full attention. The inheritance of composure. The thing that gets passed down not through instruction, but through witnessing. Through 29 years of watching a woman meet difficulty without flinching. "Akosua," Abena said softly. "This is Kwame." A silence. Then Akosua said, in a voice that was perfectly level and gave nothing away prematurely, "I know who he is." She stepped back from the door. Not warmly, not coldly, simply making space. The way a woman makes space when she has decided to hear something out before she decides what it means. They came inside. The apartment was modest and carefully kept. Books on a shelf arranged by color, her mother's habit passed on. A child's drawing pinned above the small kitchen table. A sleeping mat rolled in the corner beside a pair of tiny shoes. Somewhere in the back room, the sound of a small person still asleep in the late morning. Kwame stood in the center of that room with the folded photograph in his hand and 30 years in his chest and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say that should come before this. He held out the photograph. She looked at it. She did not take it immediately. Then she did. She unfolded it. She looked at her mother laughing in the Harmattan light. One had tilted back, hands open. She looked at the man at the edge of the frame with his bag and his truck and his youth. She folded it again. "My mother said you did not know," she said. "Your mother was kinder than the truth," Kwame said quietly. "I knew she was pregnant. I left anyway." Akosua looked at him. Something moved through her face. Swift, complex, too layered to name easily. The thing that moves through a person when they have spent years holding a question loosely, having made a kind of peace with the not knowing, and then the answer arrives, and it is both worse and more human than they expected. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Because a bus stopped," he said, "and your grandmother was standing at the front of it, and I moved my bag." It was not the full answer. She knew that. But it was the true one, the hinge on which everything had turned. She looked at Abena, who was already sitting in the chair by the window, with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who has carried something heavy to its destination and set it down. "I am not asking for anything from you," Kwame said. "I want to say that first. No claim, no title, nothing you have not chosen to give." He paused. "But I am in this city, and I will not leave it the way I left your mother. Not again. Not if you will allow me to stay, in whatever form staying means to you." From the back room, a small voice called, "Nana?" Akoshwa turned toward the sound, then back to him. "That is my son," she said. "He is 4 years old. His name is Kofi, after my father." She held Kwame's gaze. "He has never asked yet, but he will. Children ask." "I know," Kwame said. She looked at the photograph in her hands one last time. Then she set it on the table between them. Not handed back, not put away. Set down. Left in the open, in the light. "Sit," she said, simply, the way her grandmother had said it to him once, an hour ago, on a bus that neither of them had planned to be on. He sat. Abena looked out the window at the Harmattan morning and said nothing. She had said what needed saying. On a number 37 bus, to a man who had been moving in the wrong direction for 30 years, she had said one name. The rest had found its own way home. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. If it moved you, I think you'll find a home in the other videos on your screen right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come join us. There's always a place by the fire at Village Heart. Until next time.